Today we're going to dive into one of the most brutal and honestly one of the most important conflicts in all of history, the 30 Years' War. It's a story that starts with a fight over religion, but it spirals into this political free-for-all that completely reshapes Europe, and, it literally invents the modern idea of what a country even is.
And just to give you a sense of the sheer horror we're talking about, look at this number. In the German lands, right at the center of the storm, somewhere between a fifth and a third of the entire population died. That's a staggering loss of life, a level of devastation that's really hard to wrap your head around today.
So that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did one local religious uprising in Bohemia manage to set the entire continent on fire? How did it pull in almost every major power and just keep burning for 3 long decades?
Well, the whole thing starts in the Holy Roman Empire. And you have to understand, this wasn't really a single country. It was more like a fragile patchwork of hundreds of little states, all simmering with deep religious divides. It was basically a giant tinderbox just waiting for a match.
And at the core of all that tension was this one Latin phrase, cuius regio aus religio. It means, whose realm, his religion. It came from a treaty back in 1555, and the idea was simple. The local prince or king got to decide if his state was going to be Lutheran or Catholic. This sounds like a solution, but it actually fused religion and political power together in a really dangerous way.
And here's the fatal flaw, the giant loophole in that whole deal. By the 1600s, another Protestant faith, Calvinism, had gotten super popular, but it had zero legal recognition under the old treaty. So you've got all these powerful Calvinist rulers and their people stuck in this legal gray area, which, as you can imagine, created a ton of instability.
And this is the moment the match gets lit. It's 1618. Protestant nobles in Bohemia are furious with their very Catholic king. So they storm Prague Castle, grab 2 of his top officials, and just throw them out of a window. Now, miraculously, they survived the 70-foot drop, but it didn't matter. The message was sent. This was rebellion. The war was on.
So what started as this one act of defiance in Prague, it didn't stay local for long, not even close. It began to spiral, dragging in more and more countries in 4 distinct phases. You can really see how it just gets bigger and bigger. First, it's just the local Bohemian phase. But then, Protestant Denmark jumps in to help their fellow Protestants, and it becomes the Danish phase. Next, the Swedish phase kicks off when the military genius Gustavus Adolphus of Sweden lands his army. And then, for the final phase, you get the biggest twist of all. Catholic France joins the fight. And right here, this is the moment everything changes. I mean, think about this. Catholic France, led by a cardinal no less, declares war on the super-Catholic Habsburg family that ruled Spain and Austria. Any idea that this was just a war about religion? Poof, gone. This was now about pure, cold, hard politics. The war had completely transformed. It was now a raw struggle for who would dominate Europe. It was a showdown between the 2 most powerful families on the continent, the Bourbons in France and the Habsburgs in Austria and Spain. Religion was now just an excuse for a massive grab for power. So after 30 straight years of just unimaginable carnage, everybody was simply exhausted. They were broke, their lands were destroyed, and they just couldn't fight anymore. So diplomats got together to hammer out a peace treaty. But they didn't just want to end this war. They wanted to build a system that could prevent another one like it. And what they came up with was the Peace of Westphalia. And the terms they agreed on in 1648 were, frankly, revolutionary. First, those hundreds of German states inside the Holy Roman Empire, they were now basically independent, free to run their own affairs. That old problem with Calvinism? Fixed. It was now officially recognized. And on top of that, new borders were drawn, recognizing the independence of countries like the Netherlands and Switzerland, while France and Sweden got new territory as spoils of war. The map of Europe was literally redrawn.
So what does all this mean? Well, the peace completely shattered the old idea that one emperor could rule over everyone. In its place, you have the rise of individual states as the main players. Each one is now considered sovereign, with the right to control its own territory. This, right here, is the birth of the modern international system, where nations deal with each other as equals.
So why are we talking about a 400-year-old treaty? Because its legacy is everywhere. The principles that were laid down at Westphalia are, quite literally, the foundation of the world we live in today. The single most important idea to come out of all that bloodshed is state sovereignty. It's the simple but powerful principle that a country controls what happens inside its own borders, and other countries don't get to interfere.
This idea, forged in the fire of the 30 Years' War, is still the bedrock of international law. It's right there in the United Nations Charter.
And of course, the war created a massive shift in who was calling the shots in Europe. The Habsburgs, who had been the dominant power for ages, were severely weakened. And the clear winner? France. France walked away as the continent's new military and political heavyweight, a role it would play for well over a century.
Which leaves us with a really big final question. Think about the problems we face today. Pandemics, climate change, cyber attacks. These are threats that don't care about lines on a map. So, in a world like this, are the old rules of national sovereignty, created back in 1648, still enough to handle the challenges we're facing now? It's something worth thinking about.